Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, January 10th, 2018 day. My name is Nick Pitts, and you are listening to Point of View, or potentially you could be watching Point of View on the Facebook page, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. I am Nick Pitts, and I am joined today at the Millennial Roundtable with the one and only millennial. We've got Grant Skeldon here in studio with us today. Grant, who is the leader of founder of Initiative, executive director extraordinaire, soon to be author. Grant, how are you this morning?
I'm doing swell.
So good to see you. So good to see you. And then we've got Kerby Anderson as well. Kerby is in studio here with us today. Kerby, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I think we have a few things to talk about today.
There are quite a few things.
The president gave us something to talk about.
Yeah.
That's not unusual, I guess, but it'll be fun.
So we've got a packed show for you all today, and so excited that you decided to join in with us. We're going to be talking about everything from the Dreamers. Should the Dreamers be in, be out? We just heard some news that happened over yesterday and then happened overnight as well. In a shocking twist out of California, they issued a judgment that really was outside of the norm, which is nothing new for them. And so we'll be talking about Dreamers and then the responsibility for Americans, and specifically what's a Christian response to the immigration crisis that's happening right now. Then we'll be talking about this individual named Oprah. I don't know if you all have heard of Oprah before, but apparently she's potentially interested in running for president. And so we'll be talking about the prospects of an Oprah 2020 run. And then I'll be really interested to hear specifically, since this is the Millennial Roundtable, there was an interesting study that was put out that indicated that there's a significant percentage of millennials that think America is headed in the wrong direction. And we'll tease that out as well, especially when you think about some of the big picture things right now of just about a booming economy right now, individuals that are spending, there's consumer confidence, there's plentiful jobs, unemployment's at an all-time low, there's more individuals than ever that are going to college right now. Why is it that we would believe that America's going in the wrong direction? We'll spend a little bit of time on that as well. And as always, we will be taking your phone calls as well. So you can call in at any time at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we'll also be on the Facebook page. So we'll be sharing some of your comments and your questions that you leave on the Facebook page. And so unfortunately, like always, you're going to have to see my face every once in a while. And it's been known to cause shrieking and running from buildings. So just be aware of that. So you can go on the Facebook page at facebook.com/Point of View Radio, and we'll be taking some of your comments and questions from there as well. And so why don't we dream a little dream with Kerby?
Oh, very good.
So Kerby, tell us a little bit about
Let me try to explain this, and that is what we have, and remember this word, executive order, that under the previous president, President Barack Obama, in 2012, he actually announced an executive action called DACA. Now, that stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. They came to be known as the Dreamers. These are individuals whose parents came here illegally, but they are here now. Either born here or born elsewhere, but whatever. But through no fault of their own, as we are oftentimes told, they find themselves in America. Many of them are much older. Many of them have graduated from college. Some have not. Many of them have jobs. Not all of them do. But they usually are pretty good, outstanding citizens by and large to be classified as part of DACA. So that was in 2012. 2 years later, 2014, then President Barack Obama then actually added what's called DAPA to apply to the parents. Well, that one didn't get very far. It actually got set aside by a judge. But here we are now in 2018. So you see how long we've kicked this can down the road. We are deciding yesterday in a very significant meeting, which had Donald Trump, it had Republican leaders, it had Democratic leaders, in a freewheeling summit. And we've actually posted one of those articles which described it as freewheeling, televised, and at times incoherent. Yeah, that's probably true, about how to address this issue of DACA. Now, we have questions about whether or not they could get a clean bill, just trying to finally resolve the reality of those individuals. But others have said maybe what we also want to do is try to see if we can address the issue of chain migration, the visa lotteries, and all the rest. And then one last point, and I'll go around the roundtable. We had a judge that somehow did not get the memo that we've changed presidents. If you have an executive order under Barack Obama, the president, Donald Trump, is not bound by that executive order and can rescind it. But in a fairly lengthy 49-page summary said that Donald Trump has to keep his predecessor's deferred action for childhood arrivals. So that's where we find ourselves at this
He's got a
particular...
pretty big button, too.
So here we go.
Okay, so Kerby, remind us one more time, scope and scale. So how many dreamers are we talking about here? It's under 1 million, correct?
Right. And it's in the 100,000, and we can look it up and get the exact number, because to qualify, you have to be in sort of an elite status.
Yeah.
Now, let me since you asked that question, because we go around the round table, pros and cons. One of those arguments is, look, they're never going to be deported. Yeah. Anybody who seriously thinks that we are going to deport these individuals is kidding themselves. Just look at the pushback on these El Salvadorians who have been here for some time. Yeah. We'll get into that in just a minute. Mm-hmm. And this was something that was supposed to happen, and how controversial that is. So on the one hand, we're not going to deport them, but on the other hand, does this open the door for chain migration? Because not only can the dreamers stay, but their parents can say, their aunts, their uncles, and you start down the road, which once again, you don't feel like you have a border. So there are a lot of arguments we can make on both sides. We'll open up the phones, I'm sure, and get some of those. But this is what is trying to be hammered out right now in front of Congress, because there are a lot of people that are trying to tie this decision to whether or not to continue to fund the government. And so there are some that are willing to have the government shut down over the DACA issue. So there's where we are.
Yeah, and there's a political component to it. There's a compromising component to it. There's a public policy component to it. And there's also a Christian component to it. And we're going to be exploring all of that. And you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And then you can also leave a comment on the Facebook page, and we'll share that as well at facebook.com/pointofviewradio. But Grant, when I'm reading this, I'm thinking about it from a Christian perspective. And I know that would be something that you're just an expert in. Is this, when I read the biblical narrative, it seems as though we're supposed to be taking care of the foreigner. We're supposed to be taking care of these individuals that have come here. And again, like Kerby said, of no volition of their own, they were just born here. And so it seems as though it's just the logical Christian extension to show love to them and care for them.
Yeah, I mean, my mom is, I think my mom was brought here, so she would be, but it's hard. So I'm half Hispanic, half South African. I have a lot of family that is. My mom's one of 14 kids.
Wow.
It's a Mexican army, man, and she's the youngest. And so there's this huge family, and they are very hardworking. They are, I would say, upstanding citizens. And there have been people, I think, like in every family. I mean, the guys that is like crazy uncles or whatever. But yeah, I would be curious, what is the church's voice on this right now? I haven't heard much about it, at least in my church. But usually I do have a tendency of welcoming. But I think that is, I'll be honest, the millennial perspective is like, just let everything slide. Yeah. But I know if you let everything slide, eventually it's like logistically, it does hurt the community, it hurts the economy. And so I don't know much about what that looks like, but I'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah, and so we'll continue that conversation when we get back after the break, because, I mean, as a millennial with Grant, I think about what Jesus said, like we could be entertaining angels and not even know it, from Hebrews 13, or whenever you serve the least of these, you serve me. And what a great opportunity. But what does the rule of law have to do with this, and how does the Christian try to balance those two? We'll be talking about that when we get back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
David French says in a recent column that one of the most underappreciated and underreported stories of the last year was that a post-Christian America is a more vicious America that has rendered America more polarized, not less. His thesis is simple. Remove from the public square biblical admonitions such as love your enemies, and the hatred has more room to grow. When the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, and patience, are gone, the culture is becoming far more coarse. He does acknowledge that a few other commentators have written about this topic. Peter Breinart, writing in The Atlantic, says that the political elite dreamed that the culture war over religious morality that began in the 1960s and 70s would fade. It has. And the more secular, more ferociously national and racial culture war that has followed is worse. The media elite and the political elite naively believe that the decline in religious values is good for society. Less Christianity does not mean a better America. Human sinfulness and tribalism reign in the human heart. Remove rules and norms, and social conflict increases. David French also reminds us that the American Christian culture isn't that Christian. The prevailing view is what some have called moralistic therapeutic deism. That's a belief that while God exists, he's not particularly involved in human affairs and mainly wants people to be nice and happy. This moral framework might work at some level for individual lives, but is utterly inadequate as a common moral code. Essentially, we are replacing the biblical worldview with a personal ethic that has few, if any, rules. Letting sinful people prone to tribalism make their own decisions without regard to the biblical moral code is a prescription for the polarization we see in political discourse and the conflict we see in the streets. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and today we are talking about dreamers, specifically some of the immigration controversy that's been circulating around right now. And I'm joined at the roundtable today by Grant Skeldon of the Initiative Network, as well as Kerby Anderson. And before we had the break, we were talking about kind of the Christian understanding, but also this, I mean, it really is, Kerby. It's a much more complicated issue than I think what individuals make it out to be. But there is this compassionate yearning. When I think about it, especially from the biblical narrative, if we're to be known by our love, it just doesn't seem very loving if we're trying to kick them out of the country, right?
Right. Well, and again, the difficulty is that this is where you have two kind of biblical principles that collide. Let's talk about the compassion side. You can go to Deuteronomy 10. You might remember in Deuteronomy 10, it says, because you were mistreated in the land of Egypt, you, as now those who have taken the land, are to treat those who are sojourners and strangers in the land with compassion. And so you have the gleaning laws, and you have various other kinds of requirements of individuals. Now, by the way, people that want to wrench that verse out of context, those who were sojourners never actually were allowed to participate in Israel in the sense of like a vote. So you don't want to, just jump from Deuteronomy 10 or any other passage to where we find ourselves in the New Testament. And speaking of the New Testament, how about Matthew 25? What you did to what? The least of these? Exactly. So I can give you a lot of those compassion verses. But let's get the other side there, just so we don't take too much time, and recognize we also have the rule of law verses, and that has to do with Romans 13, because any country certainly should be able to actually have control of their borders, and we render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. We see from Jesus. We also are to obey those in authority, and government certainly wants to provide a legal way for people to come into this country, and every year 1 million people come in here legally. Mm-hmm. There's one other issue. Once you start talking about that, there's also the fairness issue. And I don't want to go too much longer because I want to get some comments around the table and certainly our callers. But it's the fairness issue because we've over the years had people calling in saying, I was in Germany and I wanted to be an American citizen. And it took me so many years to eventually come to this country. Or I had somebody saying I was in Canada and I just wanted to be an American citizen, but I had to jump through every single one of these hoops in order to finally become a citizen of the United States. And then they would say, but it's really unfair that somebody that walks across the border, and they're from Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, and then they might get a path to citizenship even potentially before I do. And you know as well as I do that if you're standing in line to get tickets to go to the movie and somebody cuts in line, you get a little bit upset about that. So that's another issue to put on the table with this discussion.
I get upset about it unless, of course, it's Star Wars. Then I'm not really that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm not a Star Wars guy, but I appreciate the history that comes with it. But nevertheless, it is very interesting. So let's think about scope and scale. Just kind of off cursory information, what we have is there's probably around 800,000 individuals that this applies to right now. So it's, again, if there's over 321 million Americans, this is a small percentage. But I think it's really important for us to understand that there's often been this negative preconceived understanding of immigrants just being kind of very dependent and reliant upon the system, when in actuality, many of these dreamers are contributing in very significant factors. We're thinking about some of those jobs that individuals just don't want, that dreamers are willing to do. But it's just not on that kind of the low skill end of this job spectrum either. Very high end. You think about Silicon Valley right now, and many individuals that are not only leading in innovation, but leading these organizations as well as startups, are they themselves individuals that have benefited from our immigration system. And to be true to our history, Grant, I think it's going to be increasingly important, not necessarily for us to build bigger and higher walls to keep people from coming in, but we need to have a more equitable as well as a better system in place so that America can continue to keep true to its ethos, right, of being a nation of immigrants.
Yeah. For me, it helps to have scope and scale because, like I said, I have very inclusive. I think, again, millennials are anything that excludes people, we want to include, we want to invite. And then when it comes to being a Christian millennial, it's kind of like, hey, there's so much support for this. But I do realize as I've gotten older and then you kind of get at the table and get to hear how difficult it is. Like a lot of times when you hear stuff about this, it's like one story on the news and it's a person about one, what you name someone that works at Google. By and large, that's probably not everyone, but you get attached to that one story. And I realize that's great. And you're like, let that one person in. But then it's 800,000 more of those people and way different stories, way different backgrounds and elements involved. And so I realized that what I do appreciate about seeing the Democrats and the Republicans come together is I was talking to a friend on the way over here and just talking about the importance of that meeting. And he said, man, I've never seen them invite people in to watch these guys have this conversation. And even just starting so much and saying, I think we all have a heart and assuming the best of each other. I haven't seen that a lot in the last year towards each other, different parties. Yeah.
So for those of you that are listening, there was something fascinating that happened yesterday that really was, I mean, it was very different than what's ever happened. From my understanding, very different from what's ever happened before. President Trump brought in members of Congress and they had this kind of bipartisan conversation about immigration, to where there was Democrats and Republicans, Senate and House members, and they came in. But one of the differentiating factors wasn't just you can film for a little bit, you can take a couple of pictures, but really for almost over an hour, they allowed access to cameras, and they really got to be a part of this conversation. And it allows the American people to watch in on kind of the democratic process, the Democratic Republic process happening. And Grant, I think about this from a millennial perspective. We highly value transparency. That is our thing. We want to know, and communication unknowingly is like a love language for us. We want to be inundated with information. And this move by President Trump, I mean, was something that I found to be well received.
Actually, I know that you said incoherent, but for me, I appreciate watching it because when you watch the debates, I mean, it's very easy to have these zinger. I'm a sarcastic guy. Like if someone says something, I can quickly come up with a comeback. Even if I don't believe it, I just like that would be a good comeback. and I think that Donald Trump has a spiritual gift in that also sometimes. And so with that, it's easy to and that's really what I feel like a lot of the debates were, is who can have the better like zinger or finisher or response. And so with that though, like I was thinking on the way over here how the Mexican president said he's not going to build a wall, and Donald Trump said it's going to go like 1 or 2 feet higher now. Yeah. Like this is the practicality behind that one little statement. Why I liked watching that conversation, and if young adults could watch that, and just people in general, and become educated on. It's easy to say one thing or put up a sign and protest, but when you see the intricacies of really putting certain things into play, I was like, dang, this is hard. This is difficult. It's not as easy as we try to make it.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that's going to happen, especially Kerby, when you think about it, because they're really the kind of the DACA, the Dreamers, really a part of that process and really going to be the kind of contentious issue is the building of the wall. President Trump,
Right.
Republicans by and large want the wall. And then there's Democrats that aren't necessarily thrilled about the wall because it's about 1,700 miles on the southern border, 1,700 miles on the southern border, and also just the sheer scope and scale, how much it's actually going to cost to build that wall is pretty hard pill to swallow for Democrats. And so that's like a pretty contentious issue for them.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of called linkage. In other words, they want to link things together. They want to link the decision on DACA to extending the government, link it to the issue of chain migration, link it to the whole issue of the lottery, the visa lottery, or link it to the wall. And in some respects, that's why I did use the word incoherent at one point, because what you did, and you saw something, you got sausage making. You got to see a little bit what that was like yesterday, but you also got to see how people come out with different perspectives, because at one point they actually said, so we're going to do this, 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 and this. They did 4 things. And then they got together, and a few minutes later, I don't know if it was Dick Durbin or Melendez or somebody like that said, no, we didn't decide that, and go, I've got video that shows that you did. So you've all been in situations where you and your buddy have sat down and you agreed to something and you didn't write it down. And then 2 weeks later, he goes, no, I didn't say that. I didn't agree to that. So you can see why we have the problem that we do, because everybody looks at it from their own vantage point. Everybody is listening to what they want to hear. And now we have videotape evidence of the fact that some of the worst listeners on the planet are members of Congress, right?
Aren't you so glad you listened today? So one of the comments, one of the questions on Facebook was, if DACA people apply for citizenship and are in the process of citizenship, would they still be deported for not being a citizen? And I think initial blush, no, simply because the fact that I think deportation is largely just an empty threat right now.
Right.
That really, in the grand scheme of things, this is just the sheer number of illegal immigrants in the U.S. is 12 million. And I think the number is around 3 to 4 million, which are children right now. And so just imagine if you deport the parents, for example, the size, the scope, and the scale of putting the stress on our child protective services departments, of just all of those children that are now flooding the foster care system.
Yeah.
It will shut it down. So all that to say, we are going to have to take one of those breaks, but know that we're going to continue to take your comments on Facebook as well as some of your calls as well. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And if you go on facebook.com, unfortunately you see me, but you do get to leave a little message or a like or something along those lines, and we'll get to it right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View on this January 10th, 2018 day. My name is Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable here on Point of View by Kerby Anderson, as well as Grant Skeldon of the Initiative Network. And we've been talking about dreamers, and specifically kind of the bigger picture, I guess you could say, not necessarily specifically, but the bigger picture of just being immigration, of immigration being something that's valuable, something that's been good, part of our history, being a nation of immigrants, but also how do we continue to maintain the rule of law? Understanding that the rule of law gives us stability. It gives businesses an understanding to be able to accurately calculate the risk in order to be able to move forward in a profitable manner that would hopefully trickle down into our country, as well as just the Christian perspective too, Grant. It's this understanding of trying to be compassionate, trying to be loving, trying to be welcoming, trying to extend hospitality. Yeah. But on the other side, recognizing from Romans 13 that we have rules and God has put into place these individuals to lead us and to be able to guide us in such a way that hopefully would restrain the evil in order to foster an environment of good. We find ourselves at a pretty interesting place with this immigration issue.
Yeah. Kerby, you instigated a thought in me. You said something about them recording the whole conversation, and
right.
It just made me think how they're going to probably everyone's going to put their best foot forward because they're being watched.
And I think that was helpful too.
It was, yeah. It's like we need to. There was a lot of kind words in the beginning. Now people didn't back up. I remember there was one time when Donald was saying, "Hey, we said this," and then everyone's like, "No, she did not mean that." And so people did say things, but all that is to say, I was thinking, and I know this is a stretch, but maybe not so much, is there's been a lot of talk about having police officers have cameras because there's a lot of lives at stake if they do or don't make the right decision. And I would say, how crazy would it be if politicians, when meeting, did have to have little cameras? Like we got to be able to see this because this does impact the lives of millions of people.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. I can't remember when C-SPAN was started.
Yes.
But C-SPAN really did.
I remember in the early 1990s because all of a sudden that's when Newt Gingrich said, "I've got an opportunity to talk to people."
So true.
Yeah.
And so you've got C-SPAN that really gave us entree into, I guess, some of these, really just general sessions. And I guess at times they'll have other issues. But
sometimes pretty boring, let's face it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I remember Adam Magoo, who's a councilman here, talking about how, hey, young adults, you want to come get involved? And they were like, yeah, what can we do? And they come to town hall meetings and stuff like that. And he said, I will warn you, they're not always fun. Every now and then there's a lot of tension in the room, and you see everyone's next word. But most of the time he's like, you'd be shocked some of the big things we are making decisions on, and no one seems to care, and no one seems to be there. So I would assume maybe if it was open to the public all the time, maybe we'd actually be shocked how much people still wouldn't pay attention. But for that meeting, I felt like I'm actually pretty intrigued just because it's a big deal.
Yeah, and again, obviously distance and geographic proximity hinders individuals from being in those rooms, plus security, and then you're just not welcomed in those rooms. Contra to Hamilton, you do want to be in the room where it happens, and some of us just can't be in the rooms when it happens, but we do elect officials in order to be in the rooms where it happens. And so to put that local presence that Adam was talking about and what's so needed at the city council level is to be able to be the physical presence, which is just phone calls, Kerby, right?
That's
Time and again, whenever there's elected officials,
phone calls, that kind of stuff.
Phone calls, emails, letters, that demands that a need has to be addressed. And at the end of the day, you are their boss, right? You get a chance to be able to elect them in and take them out, right?
Well, and one of the things I think is so interesting is the few times people do get involved, I mean, the winds blow very differently. Years ago, we used to have a church where we would do this action luncheon. At the end, we'd write a letter to, in most cases, it would just be to the legislature down in Austin. But we had legislators say that if I get 3 letters, I mean, I'm at DEFCON 3, and if I get 10 letters, I'm at DEFCON 5, I'm like, what is going on? Because nobody responds. Well, that's even true at Congress, because the day of writing a letter to your congressman, which was maybe your grandparents' day, maybe my parents' day, is not true today. And so some of these issues generate an enormous amount, not so much letters now, but emails and phone calls. And Second Amendment issues, you talk about gun control, the phones will ring off the hook. But this issue of immigration possibly could. In the past, one of the reasons we've never been able to get comprehensive immigration reform is because you get, hundreds of phone calls sometimes into a congressional office, and they're on both sides, and the member of Congress goes, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now because I've got 50% for and 50% against. So we'll see what happens this time. But again, I think they would be wise if they would deal with one issue at a time. Every time we do comprehensive health care reform, comprehensive immigration reform, it's always a disaster. So let's just deal with the DACA issue, maybe something related to it this time, and then postpone the next time. And I think that's what Donald Trump said, but after hearing some of the Democrats, I'm not sure what anybody said after that.
I am very true. But I do know what Rick says on Facebook. So this is a pretty important question. And Kerby, you've touched on this pretty significantly before. Rick says if illegal immigrants, 12 million or more, tend to vote for Democratic candidates and the presidential election is decided by 1 to 2 million votes, will conservatives ever win the presidency again, or any office in states favoring illegal immigrants? That's a great question, because at the end of the day, though, Kerby, right, it's not necessarily the popular vote that wins an office. It really is the Electoral College when it comes to the presidency.
Well, and again, we had John Smirik on yesterday, and that was his argument. That if you just let in 12 million individuals, eventually even Texas looks like California, Texas looks like New York, Alabama looks like New York. I mean, because eventually this ratio is pretty much a 3-to-1 ratio. 75% vote Democratic, about 25% in round numbers vote Republican. And to turn that around, if indeed all the immigrants coming in right now were voting Republican, do you think that next to Donald Trump you would see Dick Durbin and Henny Steny Hoyer? Excuse me, I almost got it backwards there. Or some of the other leaders there as well? No, because obviously the Democrats right now know that this is a potential constituency for them as well, right?
Yeah, and again, our parties aren't static, right, Grant? Like it's an extent that we can be very mobile relative to parties to be able to change. I think about it, especially, I mean, let's talk on a hot button issue right now, same-sex marriage, and how many individuals have just switched their affiliation or their views towards same-sex marriage. And that's not really a party issue anymore by and large, because you've got both sides of the party that are endorsing it right now. So it's not necessarily a party issue. And one of the things that I'm always cognizant of, especially from the Christian perspective, is that Christians, while there does need to be at times can be an association with a party, we're much better as issue people. We need to be issue people that press on issues that really do advance the biblical narrative, or get a biblical understanding of truth, of goodness. Because at the end of the day, the biblical narrative is pointing towards Jesus, and Jesus is offering us the opportunity of the fullness of life from John 10, as well as our joy to be made complete. And one of the things, the beautiful things that we have, is the opportunity not only to help people to experience the goodness out of this world, but also point to the creator of the world. And the political process is one of the ways that you can do that as well. So let's go ahead and take one phone call before the break. We've got Susan in Texas right now. Susan, you there?
Yes, I was listening to your quotes from Scripture and trying to be compassionate. I actually kind of am compassionate to a child that had no control about coming here, but his parents didn't care about him enough to bring him here legally, and now they face a problem. So I would be actually willing to help those, and I was wondering how long it takes if they have to go back to their country and wait to come here legally. How long do they have to wait? Can't they go back and live in their country a few years and then come back legally if they want to? Surely their parents lived there their whole life, and they know people that the child could live with, or the grown-up child. They're grown-up children. They're not children now. Yeah. But just to help them, I wouldn't mind paying for 3 or 4 C-5 Galaxies to fly them back to their country.
Well, one of the things that were proposed in some of the earlier immigration bills, none of which got any traction, was the idea that if indeed you came here illegally, you would go back to your host country, you'd get in line, you'd pay a fine, but eventually you could come into this country and find a path to citizenship. Right now, there's none of those requirements. Either you're here or you're not, and if you're here and you're here illegally, you will be deported. And right now you have this executive action called DACA, which existed up until the time in which Donald Trump allowed it to lapse. And now you have this situation where these dreamers are in kind of limbo. They don't know if at their work, let's use the example, working at Google, that somebody's going to come and knocking at the door someday and say, I think it's time for you to go back to El Salvador. Mm-hmm. The reality is they're not going to do that, and they're not going to be deported. There are just too many political difficulties with that. But at the same time, they're kind of in limbo. So that's why we need to have some kind of resolved issue.
And I think that's the characteristic issue of this whole situation is instability right now. There's instability for those that are here right now, as well as there's an unstable process whereby individuals can wait, quote unquote, in the line. Well, the reality is there's not a line. It's just it's like going overseas to an airport. It's just whoever gets to the counter first.
There you go.
There's not a clear
Great
line
illustration.
at all. There's not a clear line
Yes.
at all. And
Yes.
so regardless of your position, you should want stability. You should want order. And right now, doing nothing, the status quo, is not order. It's chaos, it's disorder, and it's fostering this breaking of the law that I think is very detrimental for our process in the American system. But I would be interested in your point of view. So you can call in 800-351-1212 or go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we will be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Drug testing of employees is always a source of frustration. Nonetheless, it is essential to safety in the workplace. But does drug testing ever threaten an employee's religious liberty? J.B. Hunt Transport recently found itself facing that very question along with lawyers at the EEOC and the Sikh Coalition. Hunt Transport randomly tests its employees for drug use by using a hair sample. That works in most cases, but not for Sikh employees. Sikhism requires its followers to neither shave nor cut their hair. The simple act of plucking a hair from their head would cause Sikhs to violate their religious beliefs. Sikh applicants to the trucking company explained their predicament, but the company denied the request for an alternative drug testing option. Ultimately, they were not hired, and the employees sued, alleging religious discrimination. Wisely, the company agreed to settle the matter. Employers cannot make employment decisions based upon an employee's religion. Further, companies have a duty to accommodate an employee's religion so long as that can be done without undue hardship to the organization. In this case, refusing to hire someone because they would not cut their hair for a drug test is unreasonable when multiple alternative tests are at the company's disposal. Freedom, and especially religious freedom, demands that we do the hard work of balancing corporate safety against individual liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Let me ask you, what if America's best attorneys from the very top law firms got together to defend religious freedom in court? That's exactly what's happening at First Liberty. And the best news? We're winning over 90% of our legal actions. Come learn more at firstliberty.org. You'll be encouraged. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined by Kerby Anderson and Grant Skeldon here in studio, and we have been talking about dreamers, immigration by and large, and trying to figure out what is a Christian perspective, but also just what are some of the specifics of things that are happening right now. We know that our elected officials have been talking about this around the roundtable, as we saw on video yesterday, actually, where Donald Trump convened a meeting, a bipartisan meeting at the White House, where they had a conversation, and because he was allowed cameras to be able to roll the hour-plus time. Mm-hmm. But then we're also hearing about overnight, there was a judge out of California decided that DACA didn't apply to them, and it issued it nationwide, and so that caused a little bit of a rocking of the boat, one might say. And we've been taking your comments and calls as well. And so we'll continue doing that. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we'll also be taking some of your comments as well on Facebook. So you can go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, where you can leave a comment, a question, a like, a share, an emoji, a GIF, a meme. Who knows? You leave it and we'll just respond to it because we're grateful for it. And so we're going to go ahead and take another phone call. We've got Taylor out in Texas. Taylor, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Hey, Taylor, what is your point of view?
Well, and thank you for saying GIF. It's those people who say it's GIF. I don't know what they're talking about.
They're not to be trusted.
No, they're not. Not at all. But I've been thinking about the picture or trying to paint as far as balancing the compassion versus rule of law. And I think that, like a lot of other areas, as far as biblical perspectives, there's a way to do it for the government, but there's more responsibility placed on us as individual followers of Christ. As far as there's people that made the argument like government doing welfare and charitable work and everything, and that our tax dollars go towards that. Well, the argument's been that I've heard throughout my life is that, well, no, you need to let us keep that money so that we can personally give to the charities we deem are the best and are going to be more fruitful in what they do. Well, I think it's the individual and I guess the church too, the responsibility to show the compassion, bring in, try to help immigrants or illegal immigrants, especially the children, have programs at the church, or just sacrificing your time to go and help. I mean, in any way that you see necessary, as Christ leads you to do so.
Yeah.
But as far as the government, who has a tendency to think they know best on every single thing, which, you know, they're not God, so they don't. But I think that it's as the Lord leads us as individuals and as a church community to do something, we do it that way as far as how we act out our compassion. But in enlisting the government to act out in a compassionate way without any ulterior motives, that's kind of going and being naive, I think. So that's my point of view.
Yeah, thank you so much, Taylor. Kerby, he brings up a great delineation between the government's response and the Christian response that I think is really hitting at it, right?
Well, again, churches ought to think about reaching out to those in their community. I know that most churches that I've interacted with have ESL programs. That's English as a second language. That is a perfect way to reach out into your community, and so that would be obviously something we could do. Now, the harsh reality is the government would never do this, but think about this. We bring 1 million people in every year into the United States legally, and we have about 300,000 churches. Just imagine, this would never happen, but it's a great thought experiment, if we were to say that each church would get 3 individuals immigrate into this country. Some would have very significant needs. They might not be able to speak English. They might need some work study skills. They certainly would need a mentor. They might need to be discipleship. Some of the others might come here and they've got a PhD in biochemistry from Germany, or they've got a finance degree from England, whatever. Then we would just simply, have them as a member of the church if they wanted to join the church. Now, of course, that's not going to happen, but I think it illustrates, again, these big numbers break down when we start thinking about the community. So think about what you can do in your community to reach out to the widow, the orphan, the poor, the sojourner in the land, the foreigner, because the scriptures do talk about that. And frankly, I think that the church would do a better job of assimilation and integration of individuals into the American culture than anything we could ever do through the federal government.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Kirby's kind of talking along a great point. If you look at what the role of the church would be, right? If the role of the church is or Great Commission, rather, to go and to make disciples of the entire world, one of the beautiful things about how God has blessed America is he's provided this as a land of opportunities, what we've been characterized as. And individuals are flocking to us. They want to try to take advantage of some of those opportunities. And what not a great way for the church to be able to reach out towards those that are hungry to make a change, hungry to contribute, hungry to be able to bring food onto the table for their family. And really, not necessarily, yes, continue to go into the world, but recognize that the world is coming to us.
Yeah, I want to share a story, and then I'll tie back to what you just said. I was talking to someone who, and I know we've all heard this, you have someone that's a missionary in another country, they come back, and they're telling all these stories, and their stories are so incredible. It makes you feel like you're not even a Christian because you're not seeing anything like what they're seeing. It's like these people are getting like, I used to hear stories of people being healed, but then, man, I hear it time after time in other countries. And I asked this guy last week, I said, why do you think it is that people get healed in other countries? And he said, I don't think it's just that they have more faith when you're in the mission field. He said, I think the people receiving the healing are just more hungry, is what he said. And so when you're saying that these people coming over are very hungry, in a lot of ways, what a great opportunity when you have the church that can fill the insatiable desire of the heart. And then you have these people that are so hungry that they would go through danger to bring their family to this country, but are looking and desperately needing direction. And then you have a church that knows the only way. I think there's could be a real connect. And when you really do the numbers like that, it isn't. Although it probably won't happen, unfortunately, that's not that out of reach if the body would be the body.
Yes. And again, I just think it's time for the body to step forward and see what they can do. I hear sometimes people say, well, I think we should bring all these people in. I go, you first. What do you mean? Well, how about having one in your neighborhood, in your church, even in your home for a short period of time so you can encourage them and get them on their feet?
I think that was one of the greatest things. Before I do what I do now, which is at DBU, leading up to the Institute for Global Engagement, I was a minister at a local church doing college ministry. And one of the opportunities that the college ministry had at University of Texas at Arlington there was a significant Indian population. And so there were many Indian students that knew no one when they came over here to be able to go and achieve or earn a master's degree, a PhD degree. And we would set up shuttles there, and we would shuttle in these Indian students that knew no one, that had met someone on an internet chat board, to be able to live with them and to be able to take them from the DFW airport, where the only way that they knew you is that you had their name. And so you just held a sign waiting for them. And then the rich conversation that you have, because inevitably they have so many questions if you're driving through the DFW. My goodness, that's Jerry world. The Cowboy said, just the sheer conversations that you can have. What a great opportunity, Grant.
Man, I remember someone saying this a couple years ago, and it's like really stuck with me. As he said, people are more susceptible to the gospel in the midst of transition than they are in stability. And if you really think about what was going on in the season of life in which you gave your life to Christ, for me, it was some big transitions. At 16, the biggest transition ever, a breakup. And I got kicked off the basketball team, and I was susceptible to something new, and I was hungry. And so these people in transition, there's a huge gospel opportunity in the midst of it.
That is beautiful. And so we're going to have to take one of those breaks, but we're going to come back. And when we come back, we'll continue to take some of your phone calls as well as some of your comments on Facebook. But know that you can call in as well. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over on the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can like it, you can share it, you can comment, and we'll be able to share some of your comments and questions on the air. And so when we come back, we'll continue talking about DACA, immigration, and we'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back on. Oh, sorry, you caught me there. Welcome back on Point of View. My name is Nick Pitts, and this is Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable on January 10th, 2018. We are so excited that you decided to join us for this second hour. We've got here at the Roundtable in studio Kerby Anderson and also Grant Skeldon of the Initiative Network. And we have been having a robust conversation on all things DACA and immigration, trying to better understand what's actually at play, what are some of the elements in the kind of at the discussion table when it comes to trying to set forward public policy. Also a Christian perspective when we're trying to think about trying to be compassionate and trying to be loving, but also recognizing truths from like Romans 13 of just wanting to honor the governing authorities, to allow them to set the rules of the law in order that we might have stability in the land and restrain the evil in order that peace may abide, so that we might be able to point individuals towards the Prince of Peace. Just a couple of things we've been talking about in the first hour, but we'll also be kind of spilling over into the second hour. We'll continue talking about DACA, immigration, taking your phone calls, but we're also going to be talking about everything from Oprah in 2020 to millennials think America's headed in the wrong direction. And so teasing that out a little bit, since we've got Grant and myself here, so we can go back and forth and hopefully not echo one another. If that's the case, then I might just have to disagree with you just for the sake of disagreement.
Let's do it.
Let's just do it, because as Montaigne said, there's nothing more boring than a conversation in which two people agree. And so we'll continue the conversation, but know that we're going to be taking your phone calls as well. 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And because this is the Millennial Roundtable, we'll be paying attention to Facebook as well. So you can go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and we will be taking some of your questions and comments like we did during the first hour. But let's jump on over to the phones, to the texting machines, as millennials like to call them. We've got Bob in Texas. Bob, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Bob, what's your point of view?
Well, I'll make it short if I can. I heard the other gentleman touched on this a little bit about the folks coming over here are hungry, they're searching. But I believe and have believed for a long time that God is in the midst of all this. He's on the throne, as you guys would agree. The destiny of America and the world is in His hands, and it's very difficult to send missionaries to all of these people. So I believe God is in the midst of this by bringing many of these people over here where they have a chance at least to be exposed to the gospel. And I believe that as a result, many of these will be saved. And now some of them may go back to their own countries and evangelize their own countries. But you guys would agree that's how our God works. I'm not a globalist, nor am I a proponent of any just opening the borders. But we have to consider the fact that God is on the throne and He's in control of all of this. And I've believed this for a long time, and I've heard one or two missionaries from Europe say this very thing, because they're dealing with a lot of folks from other parts of the world that don't know Christ, but they are coming to Christ. And that's my point of view. Thanks.
Hey, Bob, thank you so much for sharing. And you're right. Like I spend most of my days at Dallas Baptist University, and they have one of the largest international populations on campus, kind of in the ratio context. And so one of the fascinating things is that there is a multitude of international students from all across the world that are coming to Dallas Baptist University, and they don't have to be Christians to be there. But one of the things that they will encounter on campus is an unashamedly Christian context, where individuals aren't just wanting to teach the word, but also individuals are wanting to demonstrate the word to them with kindness. And one of the beautiful things that's happening, Bob, as you kind of pointed out, is this understanding that many of these individuals come to campus to get an education, but then they find a God that loves them. They come to know the Lord, start following after the Lord. And then with their education, they go back into their country, they go back to their context, and then they begin to populate as well and share the good news of Jesus Christ back in their homeland, which is really one of the opportunity things, Grant, that we have here in the U.S. Again, understanding the Great Commission of going out, but also recognizing that sometimes because everybody's coming here, going out just means going across the street, right?
Yeah. A couple months ago, I just got a girlfriend. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
And I met her while I was at this camp thing. And so it was this camp, and I remember there's a couple hundred young adults there. And one of the worship leaders said something that was kind of like struck me the wrong way. And not a terrible way, but I was like, I know you mean good, but I don't know. So what he said was, man, guys, and he's strumming his guitar. He's like, this is what heaven's going to be like. And I'm like, this is like all young white people. Heaven's going to have so much more than that, man. There's going to be like a lot of international diversity, racial diversity. Like, we're going to have people from generations that we like forgot. Man, they loved the Lord too back then. And so I kind of got pompous in my spirit. I was like, my group back in Dallas, we are what heaven's going to look like. And then God kind of hit me. He's like, no, you're wrong. Because, yeah, again, it's more than just domestic Dallas, young, diverse people. There's people in this city from other nations that I still need to be intentional about reaching. And that's a priority and goal, and kind of a wake-up call for me, is that God has put people in our city that are just so culturally different than myself, even if there's so much more room to grow, but in a way, there's so much more people to celebrate and to learn and engage, and it gets me excited.
Yeah. Every nation, tongue, and tribe, first of all. But let me do a shout out to, again, we were talking about this with Taylor just a few minutes ago in the first hour. What can the churches do? And I would say individual churches, individual Christians could tie in with ISI, for example, International Students, Inc., or Baptist Student Union, or some of the others that have had this outreach for many years on college campuses, because if they go to DBU, there's no doubt at all they're going to hear the gospel. Mm-hmm. However, if they go to the University of Texas at Dallas, or they go to Vanderbilt, or they go to Yale, or they go to Georgia, shout out to Georgia, maybe Alabama this week, we've got to do that shout out there. The only way they're going to hear the gospel is if you come alongside and partner with them. And I will tell you, as you just mentioned a minute ago, when you met those Indian students at the airport, if you say, I'm willing to have a student from China, Nepal, from Pakistan, whatever it might be, into my home, and we then celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas, it's just a perfect opportunity to share the gospel. And these individuals do become Christians. They're the next leaders in their own countries, and they become great traveling evangelists sometimes.
It's a phenomenal opportunity. It really is, just because, again, one of the ways that the Lord has blessed us here in the U.S. is it's given us this characteristic of being the land of opportunity, one. And a part of that opportunity is to be trained up and educated to be able to kind of take hold of the reins when opportunity knocks, and that's through the educational system. And there are some really great universities here in the U.S., and I'm biased, but DBU is one of them. Mm-hmm. You can go to dbu.edu if you want to apply. And really is that opportunity, if you're not going into a college context, to be that host home. I think that was one of the things in college ministry that we loved and students loved, is when they're away from home, they want to feel a little bit like they're at home. And dorm life can be very cramped. And so what a great opportunity for you to open up your home, whether to international students specifically or just to any college student that's in the midst of the transition, as Grant was talking about, and not only to be able to share Jesus with them, but show Jesus to them. This beautiful opportunity, because it's kindness that leads to repentance. And what a great act of kindness is hospitality. We're going to continue talking about this, as well as Oprah 2020. I'll be very interested to take your phone calls, as well as some of your comments on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio, or you can call in at 800-351-1212. And when we get back, we'll talk about this, as well as Oprah, of all things. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
David French says in a recent column that one of the most underappreciated and underreported stories of the last year was that a post-Christian America is a more vicious America that has rendered America more polarized, not less. His thesis is simple. Remove from the public square biblical admonitions such as love your enemies, and the hatred has more room to grow. When the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, and patience, are gone, the culture is becoming far more coarse. He does acknowledge that a few other commentators have written about this topic. Peter Breinart, writing in The Atlantic, says that the political elite dreamed that the culture war over religious morality that began in the 1960s and 70s would fade. It has. And the more secular, more ferociously national and racial culture war that has followed is worse. The media elite and the political elite naively believe that the decline in religious values is good for society. Less Christianity does not mean a better America. Human sinfulness and tribalism reign in the human heart. Remove rules and norms, and social conflict increases. David French also reminds us that the American Christian culture isn't that Christian. The prevailing view is what some have called moralistic therapeutic deism. That's a belief that while God exists, he's not particularly involved in human affairs and mainly wants people to be nice and happy. This moral framework might work at some level for individual lives, but is utterly inadequate as a common moral code. Essentially, we are replacing the biblical worldview with a personal ethic that has few, if any, rules. Letting sinful people prone to tribalism make their own decisions without regard to the biblical moral code is a prescription for the polarization we see in political discourse and the conflict we see in the streets. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and today is January 10th, 2018. We've been talking about DACA, immigration, and we've been joined at the roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Grant Skeldon. And we're going to take a little bit different direction, one might say, moving away from immigration and moving towards Oprah. Why not?
Why not?
So Oprah.
Something happened Sunday night that I think started that conversation.
You get a car. Everybody got a car on Sunday. No, so Oprah received a Lifetime Achievement Award on Sunday at the Golden Globes, and much was made about her speech. Really did try to ignite a fire of passion as well as opportunity, and just really painting a very bright picture for women of color specifically with her speech, and it really propelled some of this talk about potentially Oprah running in 2020. When asked by her partner if she would be running, he was very much laissez-faire, didn't really go one way or the other. And then Gayle King, who probably might even be closer than a partner. Who knows? We all have a good friend that we talk to, and Gayle seems to be that person. She again said, well, who knows if the opportunity presents herself. And Grant, could we potentially be having Oprah as the president? Is this really where we're going right now?
I know this is controversial, but I think maybe. I do think that I really thought, okay, contrast Oprah with the last president people are used to. And if you ever watch a cop movie, then you know, and especially when there's two cops, there's like the good cop and the bad cop. And they have like the bad cop that is rough and tough, and then they like rile people up, and then you got the good cop who's like, okay, I want to work with the good cop. If you think about how like direct and blunt Donald Trump is, and people, if they do or don't like that, a lot of people actually are coming around a lot and seeing the things happen and move. And so I'm not saying that he's bad and she's good, but she's definitely a little more graceful. Yeah. You got to give her that
easily.
And maybe a little more. I don't know. I mean, that speech she communicated it well. She's got a lot of heart. She can communicate the why. I think this generation likes it a lot. I don't know if because you're famous you should be able to be the president. I just think that we're in a different world where that kind of does happen, and so I'm not sure if that's reality. I'm just saying that if people, I saw a poll and it was like 74% to like. Yeah, she was the favored person.
And man, Kerby, you were just talking about how elected officials really do respond when they start to hear people talking about it in the previous hour. Individuals like just calling up your congressman, calling up your elected officials. They do respond when you hear their call. Well, that's one of the things that Oprah has done really well. She responds to the people and gives them what they want. And could that not be a precursor for what she could do in 2020?
Well, again, in our Facebook post there, somebody was saying that she clicks off a couple of buttons here, black, woman, celebrity, those kinds of things. I mean, are we going to have a situation this next time where we have Mark Cuban, celebrity, running against The Rock, celebrity, running against Trump, celebrity, running against Oprah Winfrey, celebrity? So there's going to be some interesting things that would play out. Now, first of all, she's not going to get the evangelical vote because, as we've said before, there's two kinds of spirituality. There's Orthodox traditional Christianity, and then there's kind of the New Age spirituality, and she is in the second camp on that. But would she be able to pick up some other groups? Yes. The biggest difficulty for her is that there are a number of Democrats in the wings, some of whom were sitting around that table yesterday with Donald Trump, who actually have been told it's not your time. They were told back in 2008, it's not your time, it's Hillary Clinton's time, but Obama didn't listen. And then they were told again in 2012, again 2016, and each time they've said, I'm not going to sit back this time. And again, the question is going to be where you stand on the issues. And yesterday I went through a couple of those. On some issues, maybe there would be some places where Christians would find some agreement with her. But on everything from gay rights to gun control to a variety of other topics, she's pretty much in the Democratic camp, and that's going to affect some people's perception of who she is as well. So we'll see how it plays itself out. But who would have predicted 4 years ago that Donald Trump would be the nominee, that Donald Trump would be the president? So you think I'm going to try to predict what happens 3 years from now? Not a chance.
Well, one of the fascinating things, I'm thinking about this, and whenever we were looking back, especially after Donald Trump won the primary, many individuals, especially on the right, continued to say, well, this is the result of the media. The media gave him a bunch of free publicity, a bunch of free advertisement. And then I would dare say, Grant, you cannot go on a news website or any website for that matter, and it doesn't have Oprah and 2020 in the headline because they know those are the things that are going to cause individuals to click. And so are we not seeing this again? Even my sheer talking about this, we're propelling her into the conversation, and inevitably that's just half the battle. Mm-hmm. If she's not having to spend her own money on advertisement. But to change it to the direction that Kerby was talking about, there was a fascinating article, Ross Douthat, who's a op-ed columnist in the New York Times, that indicated kind of the religious profile, not only of Oprah, but also of the U.S. And what he talks about is that there are three particular camps of individuals that are the religious affiliation for those that are in America. He says, one, there are the traditionalists, those that are following after Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Islam. That's the vast majority of individuals here in the U.S. And then you've got the second camp, which is more of the secularists. Those are individuals that believe science is their religion, verifiable, true, empirical, et cetera, and they always point to those. And then there's that middle that really has been kind of increasingly going to take over the traditional, which is the spiritual individuals that are kind of using both the God out there, but also the God in here, that are kind of bringing together the Rob Bells and some of these other pseudoscientists or pseudo-evangelicals into the fold to be able to point towards some type of good, point towards some type of God. And Oprah, by and large, has been the pope of that spiritual, to use I think his term is like the Harris. And I think about this from the millennial perspective. Obviously, the rise of the nuns, individuals that want to gravitate towards spiritual. I would think millennials would very much gravitate towards a peacemaker like Oprah. Right?
I 100% agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think about my friends that have been turned off, that are Republican, that have been turned off by just some of the theatrics and some of the rhetoric of President Trump. But an Oprah and an individual that one is going to care for the for the least of these, I guess if we want to use evangelical language, an individual that's going to be more globally oriented. I mean, I think that resonates deeply with millennials, right, Grant?
Yeah, I think, man, I was thinking about how many times have we had celebrities in office, and how good are they at being in office? And you guys could educate me on that. And so, first guy that came to mind, I don't know what he's doing now, but it was Jesse Ventura.
The body.
Who was a wrestler. I remember being a kid and my dad saying that guy was a wrestler once. So like, no way you can be a wrestler and then I think run for governor or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger when I think I was in high school or maybe early in college. It's like, oh, how's he going to do movies? And they were like, well, he's not going to do any movies. But then once he stopped, he kind of did do some movies. And then this is a stretch, I know, but with like John Huss and William Tyndale and John Wycliffe, like kind of paving the way. And by the time Martin Luther came around, this wasn't a new idea. These guys had kind of made this message a little bit more popular. But with that, I just think that, Donald Trump has really opened a lot of doors in a sense that you can be a celebrity and maybe not a politician and do this. But now it's guys that, I mean, Donald Trump did interact with a lot of politicians. Well, I don't know how much with Oprah. I don't know how much with Kanye West or with The Rock, or you name someone else that I hadn't even heard was wanting to run. But I do think if you were in Uganda or if you were in Asia and you were here in like 2020 was these four, this sounds like a reality show. Like,
it
and
sure
one
does.
I would totally actually, unfortunately, want to watch between these four groups trying to go against each other that are huge celebrities. Like, you could not watch media without this being on if that really does happen.
C-SPAN was the original reality
you got
TV.
the list here. You're making the list right now. Tell us your list.
So in my mind, here's what I thought about Schwarzenegger, Ronald Reagan, obviously, which is just the prototypical. Fred Thompson, Law and Order, Tennessean, Senator Al Franken, or I guess the former Senator Al Franken, and then unknown Sean Duffy. So I don't know if you remember Sean Duffy. Grant, Sean Duffy was on The Real World. And so I believe he's in Wisconsin. I believe he's Wisconsin. So he's a representative out of
Wisconsin. Well, now if you're going to use Congress, you had the guy that played Gopher on Love Boat, and he was a member of Congress and things like that. And let's go south of the border. They're saying that the next president might be the actor who is in Bella, who is one of those Hispanic stars, and now you might have a celebrity as the president of Mexico. We have a celebrity as a president of the United States, so when you start looking at that, maybe Oprah is the next president. I don't think so, but that's at least a kind of an interesting conversation.
Yeah, that is for sure it is. And so you can join in on this conversation as well. We'll be continuing this as well as talking about the direction of America. Specifically among millennials, there's a poll that indicates that a significant percentage of millennials think that the country is going in the wrong direction. Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? Grant and I are going to talk about this. Kerby's also going to join in on the conversation, and we would love for you to join in as well. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go on Facebook, because I'm looking right at the camera right now and talking to you, Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Leave your comment down there. Like it right there, or just tell us what you're thinking right now. We would love to hear from you as well. So you can do that on facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when we come back, we'll talk about the direction of America, and we would love to hear from you. We'll be back.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts on this January 10th edition of Point of View. I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Grant Skeldon of the Initiative Network and also Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about Oprah 2020 and how her speech on Sunday, there seemed to be themes of a campaign stump speech, one might be able to say, painting a kind of a brighter picture and what we might be able to do in the moment to be able to make that happen. And so many are starting to write, and kind of the talk is percolating about potentially a run for presidency. And there have been a couple of comments as well that have been offered up by some individuals, some that are saying it won't happen, others that are saying it will happen. There's one comment on our Facebook page by Clayton, and he says, Oprah's been all over with her views and has been taped for over 40 years. Do you think the past will not come back and waste time and her money trying to stop the storms? Well, yeah, she has been very much public all of her career. And so if Hillary Clinton was any indication, kind of some of those views at times can come back to haunt you. But then again, I mean, she has been a force to be reckoned with. I mean, she is the queen maker. And even when she calls for a boycott on meat or anything, she has still been able to move forward past that. And so we're going to continue taking your phone calls and your comments. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or jump on over to facebook.com/Point of View Radio, and we'll be taking your comments and questions on there as well. But we're going to go to the texting machine, also known as the phone. We've got Dennis in South Carolina. Dennis, you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Dennis, what is your point of view?
I have this kind of a hobby horse I ride, I guess, about humanism in schools, how we've been indoctrinating our population with humanist ideas since the late 1800s. And it just seems like there's a correlation between that and people wanting to vote for celebrities. Man has been elevated above God, and to look at someone who's famous and has this kind of prestige, there's an attachment to that we used to reserve for, in a broad sense, we used to reserve for God. Can you imagine a candidate like Oprah Winfrey standing up there saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights? That wouldn't even fly. People wouldn't even understand what she was talking about. They think of human beings and their great qualities as, their salvation, as our salvation. And I think that's got to do with the humanist indoctrination that's been going on for so long in our schools. And that's my point of view.
Hey, thank you so much, Dennis. Dennis has raised a pretty good point, kind of having to give the oath and not necessarily believing in the inalienable creator, right? But again, we have there's no religious test to be able to enter office, and so it does provide pretty flexible opportunity there. But especially for the Christian contingent, we know that belief and faith in God and kind of a religious affiliation has been something that's been pretty significant, if the past is any indication, and kind of what Shakespeare quipped, that past is prologue, as well as what I guess you would say Mark Twain said, that we don't necessarily, the past isn't repeated, but it does rhyme. And
it does rhyme.
And what we continue to hear is that Christian tends to be a theme in the electoral box and ballot. But it does, he brings up a really great point in the sense, especially from a Christian perspective, we're moving away from kind of the good God mentality. And Richard kind of illuminated it in the article, or illuminated it in his comments relative to Oprah Winfrey running in 2020 and the secular humanism that continues to be a little bit more pervasive. But it's interesting direction our country's taken. And Grant, we've been talking about this, and we'll transition into the next article. There's an article on our website, pointofview.net, that indicates that millennials are thinking that the country is going in a wrong direction. And so the article really just kind of understands some of the characteristics, that the reason why they would think that. But there was a good number that was put out in December by the Harvard Institute for Politics, and number of millennials that think the country is headed in the wrong direction is 54%, and only 14% think it's on the right direction. And I when I read numbers like that, especially because I put out the daily briefing and there's just an overview of the day's news, there's a lot of good things that are happening right now here in the U.S. I mean, just outside of politics in general. We're at a record low. We're at, not a record low, but unemployment is at a pretty significant low right now. The stock market is at a very significant high right now. You've got the consumer confidence, which is indicated by credit card debt. One of the indicators is credit card debt is at a pretty good high right now. Individuals, we're not in any wars, even though there's some instability right now. Well, I guess we are technically underneath some, but there's somewhat kind of peace that's existing, but we're still thinking that we're headed in the wrong direction. Grant, when you hear 54% of millennials think that we're headed in the wrong direction, what does that strike within you? Does that seem like right, or is there some areas where millennials might not be so satisfied with the direction we're headed?
With the government, and where here's one thought I have. Even in joining this conversation, always trying to get more educated, I do think my dad is very involved in knowing what's going on in politics. And sometimes I used to tell him, he's like, Grant, you need to know more. You need to know more about this. And I'd be like, but Dad, what? You always seem so upset with everything that's going on. Like, why would I want to do that to myself? And it doesn't seem like what you're trying to make happen is happening. And so I could see millennials maybe with as this selfish and it's not a helpful and hopeful posture, but I could see that. A couple of things that I do think have really changed that were pivotal, staple things for generations in the past, that it is affecting us in how the government runs things. Is I always say college. I do think when colleges have a better guarantee of you going into debt than you getting a job, that's not a good guarantee to have. I think marriage, this generation has seen marriage and divorce maybe like no generation in the last at least 100 years. When we talk about pension or just even the thought of like money being left over for us when we retire, I don't see a lot of people giving a lot of confidence that we should count on that. Mm-hmm. And then church, even with the church, I think one of the biggest questions to really measure the effectiveness of the church is, if your church shut down today, how long would it take for the neighborhood to notice? And if it takes a long time, it probably shows that you weren't that engaged in the church, in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. The ideal church would be one that when it shuts its doors, the neighborhood asks, what do we need to do to keep you around? Because we can't go on without your involvement in our community. And so one of the big questions I've been writing in my book is, why is the most cause-oriented generation in the world not connecting with the most cause-oriented organization in the world, the church? Mm-hmm. Because this generation wants to go and do something. There's nothing you can do that's going to change the world more than get engaged in the church and through the gospel going out into the world. And so there's just a lot of changes that have made what my parents and my grandparents' perspective of the American dream maybe sometimes look like not an American dream, but a millennial nightmare, I would say.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know that's strong.
That's good. That's good.
I know that's strong,
yeah,
but it's just a different world.
Yeah, it's a very different world, Kerby. I mean, we're a large part of millennials are entering into the second, third year out of college and are entering into the workforce right now, and it doesn't seem as though it was as good as previous generations, right?
I think that's probably easy to document economically, because you had, during the time in which the parents of baby boomers grew up, their actual spending power and their net income, when adjusted for inflation, doubled. So this was the halcyon years. This was the time for which the generation was fought. The World War II was fought for this generation, and there was all sorts of economic expansion. So they did well economically. Whereas, let's look at millennials. A lot of them are graduating, as we pointed out a minute ago, with a tremendous amount of debt. So we can certainly make that case economically. It's tougher to make it spiritually, but let's think about this. This is also the most secular generation in American history. The fastest growing demographic right now in millennials are the nones, those individuals that call themselves atheist, agnostic, or no preference. And if you get your sense of meaning out of being involved in a cause-oriented organization, the church, and you're not involved in the church, unless maybe you found a substitute, maybe it's Habitat for Humanity, or maybe it's some kind of dealing with social justice issues or human trafficking or something like that, you can see why there's a sense of frustration. The question I'd love to ask some of the millennials that feel it's headed in the wrong direction would be, what do you think you could do to change it and put it in the right direction? And that would be another question that I think is going to come out in Grant Skeldon's book this next year.
I don't want to answer those questions. I just want to complain for a second. So let me complain a little bit more, because Grant's right. There's more of us that are getting college educations than ever before. We're the most educated generation, but we're also the debt-ridden generation. We've got a significant number of us that I think the average college student will graduate this year if they go to a nonprofit public school with $29,000 in debt. So it's almost like a type of indentured servanthood to a certain degree. Then you've also got, moving forward, we're underemployed. 51% of millennials are underemployed, whereas their education doesn't necessarily match with the position that they're in, unlike any other generation. So that's much higher than normal. And so there's a couple of other factors, but hopefully you're not going to tune out just because I'm complaining, because I think there's some great opportunities. And so come back and we'll hear some great opportunities among millennials in the right direction.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Drug testing of employees is always a source of frustration. Nonetheless, it is essential to safety in the workplace. But does drug testing ever threaten an employee's religious liberty? J.B. Hunt Transport recently found itself facing that very question, along with lawyers at the EEOC and the Sikh Coalition. Hunt Transport randomly tests its employees for drug use by using a hair sample. That works in most cases, but not for Sikh employees. Sikhism requires its followers to neither shave nor cut their hair. The simple act of plucking a hair from their head would cause Sikhs to violate their religious beliefs. Sikh applicants to the trucking company explained their predicament, but the company denied the request for an alternative drug testing option. Ultimately, they were not hired, and the employees sued, alleging religious discrimination. Wisely, the company agreed to settle the matter. Employers cannot make employment decisions based upon an employee's religion. Further, companies have a duty to accommodate an employee's religion so long as that can be done without undue hardship to the organization. In this case, refusing to hire someone because they would not cut their hair for a drug test is unreasonable when multiple alternative tests are at the company's disposal. Freedom, and especially religious freedom, demands that we do the hard work of balancing corporate safety against individual liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Let me ask you, what if America's best attorneys from the very top law firms got together to defend religious freedom in court? That's exactly what's happening at First Liberty. And the best news? We're winning over 90% of our legal actions. Come learn more at firstliberty.org. You'll be encouraged. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and if you're still listening after that commercial break, thank you. We've been talking about millennials headed the wrong direction as the country, and millennials, by and large, are thinking that we are not headed in the right direction as a country. 54%, according to a Harvard Institute of Politics study, or a poll that came out a few weeks ago. And what's interesting, we saw that we highlighted an article on the website that really just gave particular data points or particular points as to why it might not be going in the right direction. But Grant, I'm thinking through a list right now, and maybe help me understand if I've missed one or two points. And so kind of what I alluded to in the beginning, that 51% are underemployed, differentiating from unemployed being that they have no job, underemployed being, for example, that they have a college degree, but because there's no jobs in their town, they're working at a fast food restaurant, for example. So that would be considered not unemployed, but underemployed. So 51% underemployed. Many of them, I mean, the greatest number, this is the first generation where there's more individuals that are living at home, 33% that are actually married or living with a spouse. So many of them are living at home. No offense to parents out there. They're just, it's just when you move away, when you go to college, eventually there's a time that you break away, and many of them are kind of in their basement or they're in their childhood room right now. So that could be a factor. There's one, they're not married. Again, there's that idea that marriage has typically been that kind of harbinger to bring happiness. I mean, after all, the biblical narrative says that he who finds a wife finds a good thing, right? And so they're not married. The loneliness epidemic, that's not unique to millennials, but it's just a part of the American experiment right now, that there used to be 3.6 on average friends that an American had. Now that number's dropped down to 1.7. So they're isolated, though they have 338 friends on Facebook on average. And then there's just this idea that there's just playing more video games. I mean, video games is, for all the good things that happens for video games, problem-solving skills, hand coordination, it has been known to trigger certain things inside of individuals that kind of is not a good thing. That would indicate for them to check off, we're headed in the wrong direction. Am I missing anything when I think about certain things? And these aren't even political issues.
How about race? That was one, because didn't that show up in the article somewhere? Racial tensions.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Racial tensions. There's the sense that we're just, for millennials are largely relational people. We grew up in a very diverse generation. There's very great diversity that was surrounding us, and the racial tensions and everywhere from Ferguson to what's happened in New York to what's happening in L.A. I mean, there's just this palpable sense that things are not the way that they're supposed to be. And Grant, I mean, it really is just, it seems very easy for us just to be able to say, well, we're headed not in a good direction that would be conducive for millennials, right?
Yeah. And so, like you kind of said at the end, let's take on some responsibility, Kerby said. And so I'm gonna look at these a little more hopeful perspective. I like how Jim Dennison would always say at the end of all these negative statistics, he's like, "Aren't you glad you showed up today?"
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Like, I'm a like college, a positive or hopeful thing. I think that one thing that millennials we need to take responsibility for is that I do think we will go to college without knowing what we want to do and use college as a season of figuring that out.
Yep.
And I have a hard time believing anyone that got to go to college during the Depression would ever, I mean, you're not going to college and paying for it until you know what you want to do. And I think if we would stop seeing it as an experience and more as a real season of grinding and learning grit so that you can be a better just executor in whatever God's gifted you at, that would make it to where we maybe aren't so underemployed. Because if we're using all that time to have a great experience but not intern, like I tell parents, like, if your kid is spending $1,000 to go, you're spending $1,000 on your kid to go to school, and they're not interning or they're not getting mentored or they're not most of their time outside of classes and homework trying to learn the craft that they're going to school for, then I'd cut them off. Like, I wouldn't let them go to school, because that's why they're supposed to be at school, is not to join fraternities and sororities and all that, if it is a distraction to them learning.
Yeah, there's some great opportunities in, like, you talk about that, because college used to be, it wasn't always for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
There used to be a time that, I mean, just a smaller percentage of the population would go to college, but now college is just seen kind of as that logical next step, because so many jobs now in the workplace require a college education. But nevertheless, I mean, really, college for 90% of people is the end, but for the vast majority of people, it's a means to an end. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a small group that becomes professors, that are going to work in higher ed administration, that are going to become researchers. But for the vast majority of individuals, Kerby, that are going to college, it really is the pathway station in order to become the engineer that you studied in college to be, right?
It's the next step.
And one of the beautiful opportunities and ways that you can do that is through internships, is through opportunities that are bound outside of the classroom.
One of the things I thought about this article, and again, I encourage people to go to pointofview.net to read it. At the end, they talk about something else, and that is millennials are very or somewhat optimistic about their own personal fortunes. So the idea is their future and their finances maybe eventually will turn it around. I don't know if that's the optimism of the millennials. Everybody gets a trophy or whatever. But I think, no, there's another part of that. We just had a tax reform bill that passed. Now, if indeed that increases some people's financial future in some way, we have, about 1,000 different companies that are now giving out $1,000 bonuses to the people there. And if it is a dynamo, there's a dynamism, I guess is probably a better word, that creates more jobs, and some of those individuals who are now underemployed become employed, maybe that's an opportunity. But I come back to what Grant's been saying. This is a great ministry that we can have with a millennial generation to help them understand that if they really want to do something significant, it's not going to be what they build in a business. It's the lives that they influence. And if they want to really turn this generation around and reach this generation, it's going to be through the church. And so I just think there may be an opportunity to say, if you're believing that the country, maybe even you, are headed in the wrong direction, maybe it's time in the midst of this transition, maybe in the midst of this upheaval, to consider something else, and that is to consider the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Man, and is that not the truth? Not only is the gospel to be able to believe in, but again, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, the land of opportunity. And so we might believe that there's things that are happening that are wrong, that are putting us in the right direction, but there is so much opportunity that's available, Grant. There's so many ideas. There's so many options for millennials to really plug in on. We're going to be doers. And so it's that beautiful. I mean, just think about our president. Regardless of whatever you think about our president is not a politician. And he somehow got elected to the highest political office in the land. Philippians 4:13 cannot be more true right now. We can do all things that he strengthens us, right?
Yeah. I think if we had a better day-to-day obedience and just almost like today's the only day I really have been promised, then we wouldn't be so forward-thinking where we need to be and comparing and just being anxious to go switch to the next job and do all that. I was actually, there's this I was kind of hit by the verse that it says, give in the Lord's Prayer, where it says, Our Father, art in heaven, blah, blah, blah. And it's not blah, 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 but where he says, like, give us this day.
Yeah.
And I usually, when I think young adults are like, hey, it's not going the way it's supposed to, is because they're not in a place of life where they thought they would be by that time. Mm-hmm. And so I've actually started to try to pray just God for today. And one funny story that happened was in a small group, and this guy was in a small group, and he was asking, he needed a new fridge because he has a new child and his wife. And I said, I just heard his prayer. It was kind of like, God, will you guys pray that God would give me the wisdom to fix my fridge? I was like, what kind of prayer is that? I said, dude, I'm going to pray for you that God just gives you a fridge. Like, someone in this city just connects you with a fridge. But the thing that I did was, I'm going to pray that it happens today, because God just gave us today, and I just want to be faithful with today. And the prayer meeting was kind of boring, if I'm honest, but that kind of made me excited, because I was like, let's just live for today. This is all he's given us. And crazy thing is, that night he texted me and he's like, someone gave me a fridge.
That's beautiful.
And so just being faithful with where you are today. It doesn't matter really what you're doing, as long as you feel like, man, God is going to leverage me and I'm going to be obedient. And if you're not that way, then yeah, you don't like where the country's going, because you're not where you see everyone else on social media or on TV.
Exactly. And so to echo Grant, what Paul would say in Ephesians 5, to make the most of today, for the days are evil. And thank you so much for joining us today and spending a little time with us. And be sure to tune in tomorrow. We would love for you to join us on that. So thank you so much, Grant, for being here. Kerby, as always, thank you so much. And to you all, we'll see you back here tomorrow.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty, greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child.